Can anyone truly develop emotional intelligence, or are some people just stuck being emotionally clueless?
None of us are born emotionally intelligent. It is a developed skill.
Why is why questions poison?
It puts them in a place where they have to defend, validate, or rationalize their decision or their actions. We're putting them back into child. It is the power of information that starts to shrink or deflate that critical parent and open up their adult. The real work and success in all of this is that regulation, whether we're talking jiu-jitsu or motorcycle riding or leadership or communication skills or marriage. It is a practice.
I started applying some of your teachings and it was like magic. When you're trying to get someone from the angry child or withdrawn to the adult state, and you want to come at them kind of as critical parent, and you're asking these questions to get them back to their frontal lobe. Why questions poison? Like, why do you never, ever, ever, ever ask a why question and go to other types of questions? Can you help elucidate that? Because that's a really important one, I think.
Yeah. So the premise of a why question is to figure out root cause. And a lot of us as problem solvers want to instantly beeline to that, right? Like, why did this happen, right? And how do we fix it? But what the why question actually does to the other human being is it puts them in a place where they have to defend, validate, or rationalize their decision or their actions. And by definition, we're putting them back into child, right? Why aren't your shoes tied? Because I haven't tied them yet, right? I mean, think about just as kids, right? Why is your room not clean, right? Why haven't you taken your plate to the sink, right? Why didn't the famous one, which is you get 95% on tests, why didn't you get 100? Now, the individual doesn't go, oh, dearest parent, let me share with you the reasons I haven't cleaned up my room or whatnot. So by that, let's advance it to sort of what we see in business. You know, why did we end up with the results the way we did, right? Why have you not followed up with the client, right? Why am I getting this feedback from X, Y, and Z? Your spouse, right? You know, why were you home late? Why did you not call me? All of these things put you back into that child where you're like, oh, I got to defend. I was driving. My phone didn't have signal. I forgot to send in the report. I forgot to send in the email. And you've got that person in that emotional frying out state. And now what they're going to do, like a lot of kids, they're going to make up the story. Well, let me tell you why. Right? Because I was going to take my plates, or I'm going to clean up my room, or I didn't see my shoe was untied. And at that point, by definition, you don't have the person thinking through the adult.
What's like the jiujitsu move to get out of that why?
Right. So the jiu-jitsu move is the what and the how question, and it actually grammatically works, right? So instead of saying, why did you do this? We could say, hey, so what were some of the reasons that led you to take this action? Or, you know, why did this happen? Hey, what happened? And what does is it now starts to bring the adult. And what the how does is it starts to facilitate the solution. Because when we're asking the why question, by definition, we're trying to figure out root cause, but we're also looking for solution. And if the objective is to figure out how do we move forward in a more effective way, it is the what and the how that facilitates the thinking, facilitates the adult to adult, facilitates solution, and starts to get the other person contributing in a more forward thinking or a forwarding way.
It's also easier, like in a personal relationship, somebody comes at you with a what, and you like, shoot, Greg, I'm so sorry. My bad, dude. I dropped the ball. You immediately, it causes you to validate their feelings, apologize, which immediately brings things down.
Yeah.
And then you can have a conversation.
Yeah.
And you're not defensive. But if somebody does come at you with a critical parent why, what's the best way to turn that around?
So answer it. That's the self-awareness, and that's the success of the ego states, which is, all right, I got a critical parent firing at me right now. The best way to bring that critical parent down is to answer the questions and give them the information that they need. They might not be communicating well, and they are firing in the sort of heavy critical judgmental, we call them critical parent bullets. But if I could go, hold on a second here, let me rise above this right now, even though I'm feeling emotionally hijacked right now, and I'm recognizing this is the unexpected positive transaction, right? Which is now, even though I've got this firing at my child right now, let me not respond as treated. And I might take over the conversation or start to steer the conversation a little more effectively by using the rite of passage question, which was what you were describing earlier, which you said, hey, can I give you some advice or can I share my feedback? We can take control of that interaction again by saying, all right, Mr. or Mrs. Critical Parent, can I share some of the reasons why we ended up the way where we did? Or can I take some time to answer some of these questions? Or can I talk to you about what actions we're going to move forward? And it is the power of information that starts to shrink or deflate that critical parent and open up their adult.
Tell me how your son, I think he's like, what, 8 years old, did some jujitsu on you revolving around his motorcycle.
Well, there's a better story about his jiu-jitsu and his actual school. So one of the things I try to do with my kids a lot is practice this adult to adult communication, right? So my kid comes home and he says, Dad, I want to quit jiu-jitsu. And I say, okay, well, I want to say why. But I don't. I say, well, what are the reasons you want to quit jiu-jitsu? He goes, I don't like it. I go, all right, well, that's not a reason to quit. However, if you could come up with a good reason, a very rational reason on what are the reasons you want to leave jujitsu, and more importantly, what is a solution for this? So, what's another activity we can take on, or what else can we do with our time? Because it is very important. And if you remember, one of the reasons we're doing jujitsu is because we've committed to doing it, and it's a very important skill set, and it's important for your development. He says, okay, Dad, I could do that. Comes home the next week, Dad, I want to quit jiu-jitsu. I said, all right, well, what are the reasons? I just don't like it. All right, still haven't come up with what the real valid reasons are and what the solution is. Anyway, he comes home the next week. He goes, Dad, I figured out what I want to do. I said, what is it? He says, I want to switch jiu-jitsu schools. I said, oh, tell me about that. Right? What are the reasons? He says, well, in the current one that I'm in, the kids that are in my class are like 3 times my size. So when we're sparring, right? And there's this one kid coincidentally named Charlie who we're good friends with the family. He says Charlie's like, he's 12 years old. He's like a solid like 120 pounds. My son's like 40 pounds wet, right? He says Charlie sits on me. There is nothing I can do. All right. There's no sparring. There's no technique. He's just the physical stature of these other kids are just way bigger than me. And I'm not learning. I can't do anything. So I said, so what's the answer? He says, well, there's another jiu-jitsu school that has a kids class from 6 to 10. And there's a bunch of kids in that class that are my size. And I think it's going to be a better experience for me to go through that class. I said, okay, fine. We can totally do that. Anyway, we checked out that jiu-jitsu class, and that's the one that he's in right now. The motorcycle one. So we live in Costa Rica. We live in a gated community. If we think about Florida, same kind of thing. And my son is ripping around on his motorcycle. So he's got this little electric dirt bike, which he's very talented on. And we've gone through the rules and the safety and stuff like this. So I get a call from security, and they're like, or a letter from the Security Homeowners Association. They're like, hello, Mr. Witz. We need to let you know that your son has been excessively riding, or he's been riding at excessive speeds, and he's passing vehicles. And please have a conversation with him. I say, no problem. So now the critical parent in me wants to do this, wants to go and be like, I told you, and now, and the bike is taken away. But that's a short-term win for not a long-term sort of solution, right? So back to what are we trying to do in communication? We're always trying to facilitate communication and facilitate responsibility. I say, listen, we just got a letter from security saying that you're riding at excessive speeds. And I then say, then you're ripping past cars. He's like, Dad, I'm not ripping past cars. I said, well, look, here's the letter, bud. Like, I'm reading. He says, no. I've passed a few golf carts, but I haven't passed any cars. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, but Dad, you pass golf carts all the time when you drive. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, all right. And it instantly comes to me, which is if I hammer down on the critical parent, this isn't going to make a change in his behavior. So I say to him, I say, listen, do you know about demerit points? Like when we ride, we have riding licenses or we have a driver's license. And if we do bad things on the road, we get demerit points. And if we're not careful, our license gets suspended. And then we have a 30-day cooling off period. He says, oh, I didn't know that. I said, well, security has now revoked your riding license for 30 days. He's like, oh no. And I said, and what you're going to have to do, because I know the president of the HOA and his son's ride as well, you're going to have to do a riding test in 30 days. Anyway, he took it like a champion. He took his sort of not a grounding, but took this like really seriously. He's like, okay, I'm not allowed to ride for 30 days. And I'm going to get ready for my road test, my riding test. And we got the president's son to come and do a riding test with him, get on the bike, ride around, accelerate, show me your braking, etc., etc. What are the rules of the road? What happens when you're behind a golf cart? What happens when you're behind a car? Anyway, in quotations, he aced the test. And he came back and he was so proud. And he's like, Dad, look, I passed my test, got a little piece of paper saying passed, right? Graduated. And ever since then, he has been super, super, super responsible on the bike. And through that, we've taken into a couple different riding tracks and stuff like that. But I thought about it a lot, which is, it's so easy for us to fall into that critical parent mode.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so easy for us, specifically as leaders, managers, parents, spouses. And the real work and the success in all of this is that regulation. It's not that we shouldn't have that strong assertiveness side or that critical parent. We've got to be able to temper it, and we got to be able to filter it for the right result. And this all comes back down to the objective. So this is what we taught in communication, right? Which is what's
Right.
the objective? My objective is my son is going to make the right decisions when riding the motorcycle. If I hammer on him too quickly, right, when I'm around, he'll ride properly. It's when I'm not around. And that was the exercise and what
That's
we
yeah,
communicated. Yeah,
that's the problem. But can anyone truly develop emotional intelligence, or some people just stuck being emotionally clueless? And also,
hmm,
I want to talk about this, which I've done, which is great. It's this 360 crystal ball view of your personality. What I like about it, and I taught, behavioral analytics, how to lead high performing teams at MIT using their assessment that's been around since World War II. But your assessment, you take it, but four other people take it. And there's what you think about yourself, and then there's what other people see you as. So tell me about, can we learn emotional intelligence? And what
yeah,
is, your dad, I guess, took this medical doctor, psychiatrist
Burns.
Burns
Yeah,
stuff, and he actually created a personality inventory
yeah,
assessment with multi-raters that you've then taken to the next level.
yeah. To answer your first question, can we learn to be emotionally intelligent? By definition, emotional intelligence is learned. None of
Okay.
us are born emotionally intelligent. It is a developed skill. And it is a skill that is made up of, again, self awareness, which I believe is a forever exercise. We don't go through self awareness once, we don't do one assessment, and we are always, it's a fluid exercise. We're always assessing and evaluating. Number two, emotional regulation, which we like to call self management. Some of us like to call managing your shit, right? Which we could only do if we do pillar one. And then relational management, which is how do I now navigate your personality more effectively, even when I am hooked or triggered. And if I can develop tools around that, and there are frameworks and tools for each of these pillars, which is if we study and more importantly, if we practice. I think the mistake a lot of people make is they read the book, they listen to the podcast, they do the course, and they say, that's it. In fact, I know people like this. They've done every single program out there and they are still emotionally dim, right? Because they get caught up in the exercise of going through the program, but they don't go through the exercise of the practice. Whether we're talking jiu-jitsu or motorcycle riding or leadership or communication skills or marriage, it is a practice. And this is back to the question earlier, what makes us a better human? I'm going to do it better tomorrow, right?
Right. And also with your methodology, not only do you have to practice, but you have to think it through before,
Correct.
like, okay, what's my objective?
Correct.
This person is probably going to go into, whether it's a child, coworker, partner,
Yeah.
into angry child, withdrawn. How am I going to be prepared for all these different things? So you
Yeah.
can't just wing it unless, you're a savant or you've been, you could do it because you just
Sure,
train
we get
people.
lucky every once in a while where we can just kind of do it. And as you heard me talk about in the sessions, winging it, that term actually comes from the old days of the theater, where
Yeah.
there were understudies, right? There were backup actors and actresses, and they would wait in the wings of the theater. So if anything happened that they needed to step into the show, because the rule about the theater is the show must go on. So if someone doesn't show up, someone has to step in. If that main actor or actress got too drunk and they fell off the stage, all right, you know, after intermission, the backup steps in, and they would have to be more rehearsed, more practiced, more prepped in order to do so. So the success of communication skills, effective communication skills, effective relationships is preparing for some of these conversations. Now, we're not trying to script everything out, but we are trying to think things through, because it's hard for us to think in the moment. And that's why if we do the thinking up front, I can actually be more effective in the moment. A professional athlete, they train the way they train so they're able to execute the plays in the moment, right? So yes, planning and preparing is really, really important. And we might argue that we plan and prepare for some of the most stupid stuff in life. You plan your meals for the week. You plan your excursions on a trip, right? You plan where you're going to go for dinner, what restaurants and what time. But what we don't plan is to go have a very important conversation with our spouse. What we don't plan is a very important conversation with our business partner. What we don't plan is I got to go have a conversation with my kids. So planning that is really important. And then back to the assessment. The assessment is a brilliant tool, because for the first time, it actually gives us a defined understanding of not just our personality, but why we act, feel, and think the way we do. And it makes it concrete, where before, emotions and behavior, it's kind of mystical, right? It's kind of abstract. Oftentimes people will say to me, they're like, oh, well, Greg, this is just who I am. In fact, I've just been called to do coaching with a chief strategy officer. Brilliant guy, but a little bit of a challenge when it comes down to some of the other aspects of his leadership role. And I say to him, and we do the sort of the introductory welcome call, and I say, tell me a little bit about yourself. And this is what he begins to tell me. I'm a super creative type of person, and I see things, and I'm visionary, and I'm all of this stuff. And I'm listening to this guy, and I'm going, all right, I've looked at your profile. You're a raging critical parent, right? And yes, you're a super strong, spontaneous child. So the vision is there. But now what he's going to be able to recognize is, while that creativity and that vision and that innovation comes from the one aspect, his communication from the leadership side starts to come from that critical parent. And that's what the assessment does. And it's a brilliant assessment. It's validated. It's been a tool that we have used with all of our clients. When I first met my wife, she went through the assessment as well, which
I That's smart, super
if I
smart.
remember her profile, I worked to my father at the time. I'm like, I'm looking at the angry child scores, Dad, and I'm not quite sure. And he's like, listen, Greg, you're an angry child. So if there's one person that knows how to deal with an angry child, it's you. But it also becomes a language with me and my wife, right? Like, one of the things that I think has been very effective in our own communication is this is a language we use with each other. She'll say to me on a good day, she'll be like, listen, babe, I need you to dial the critical parent down. Like, it's too much right now. And I go, you know what? I can do that, because that's something I can do. But when she says to me, you're being so controlling, or you're being so critical, or you're sounding just like your father, this sends me to the moon. That's
Right.
nothing. I can't do anything with that. But with the definition of ego states, I can.